Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming. I appreciate having my audience. I always like small, intimate audiences, so this is good. And my name is Teresa Del Corso, and I'm an assistant dean in the Graduate School in New Brunswick Dean's Office, which is just up the road from where we are here on Seminary Place. We're over at 25 Bishop Place on the College Ave campus. And I run GradFund, which is the graduate school service unit designed to help and support Rutgers graduate students with identifying and applying for external grants and fellowships. And so what I'm going to talk with you about today is applying for extramural funding, applying for grants and fellowships, understanding the process of how to do this and how GradFund can assist you. And so what I'm going to do today is I'm going to speak off of a set of PowerPoint slides and talk about three major components. One is to give you an overview of GradFund services and how we can help you. To talk with you about how to think about integrating the process of applying for funding into your graduate career, and then to talk a bit about the proposal writing or the application writing process. And so we're going to focus on the PowerPoint slides, but I'm also at times going to go over to the GradFund website to show you live some of the resources that we have available for students. So to get started, I'm going to give you an overview of what GradFund services look like. And so what's important here is that while we are a service of the Graduate School New Brunswick Dean's Office and we sit over in that space, we will work with graduate students regardless of decanal affiliation, regardless of graduate program. If you are a Rutgers graduate student and you are looking for assistance, we're here to help you. And we help students in a number of different ways. First, through individualized meetings with fellowship advisors. And so as a graduate student, it is possible for you to make an individual appointment to come in and speak with a fellowship advisor and receive guidance and advice and feedback on everything from answering the question of what can I apply for to how do I begin to organize a plan or organize my time to work on applications to gaining feedback on an application that you may be developing. And so getting feedback on how to strengthen the materials that you're developing, how to craft them in an effective way, and how to hopefully make them as competitive as possible. So that's probably one of the most popular services that we have, are the individual meetings. We also offer a number of different workshops and proposal writing activities, and that's what you see listed under that second major bullet point there. And we do everything from proposal writing workshops and work groups to information sessions to summer mentoring programs. And summer mentoring programs are a structured summer program that we work with students throughout the summer, either in person or online, to help you use your summers to develop and craft application materials. And so something that's important to keep in mind here is that the summer is a really good time to dedicate to developing application materials for a variety of reasons, which will hopefully become clear to you as we move through the presentation. And then also we have a robust collection of online resources. And so for this, I'm actually going to go over to our website to give you a chance to take a look at what we have. So up here we see this is the landing page for the GradFund website. URL gradfund.rutgers.edu. It's very easy to get to, and you may want to, on your own personal browser, bookmark this page, and I encourage people to return to it frequently. There's a lot of information. We update it regularly. We've just gone through a major update, and so what you see today is different than what you may have seen a couple months ago if you were on our site. And my guess is if you visit us a couple months from now, it'll look even different because we keep coming up with new innovations and enhancements. But to give you a bit of a quick guide here, this really is a good starting point for you in terms of learning about what you can apply for and gaining some advice and guidance in terms of how to apply for funding effectively. So let me just point out a couple of things for you. Scheduling a meeting with us is very easy. You just go to the Schedule a Meeting tab. So click on that. And there you'll see we describe the two different types of appointments that we offer students, some information about how to confirm a meeting and our meeting policies, and then finally a form that you can fill out to request an appointment. And so this is how you can schedule an appointment. It's very easy to do. Once you submit the request, usually within 24 hours, you will get a response confirming your appointment, giving you the date and time that your appointment will be held. So what I would encourage anyone to do once they've had a chance to attend this presentation is to feel free to schedule an individualized appointment in order to come in and meet with a fellowship advisor and get some one-on-one advice. The other thing that I'd like to point out is our knowledge base, which you can access from this top tab up here or through this central navigational menu here under My GradFund, the GradFund knowledge base. And this is really, your starting point for researching and learning about different fellowships and grants that are available to you. And you've got a couple of different options here. One is to search for awards, which I'll show you in a moment. Learn about funding, which will give you a bit of an overview about what are the different types of funding mechanisms available to graduate students. CIC opportunities, and so this speaks specifically about the funding opportunities available to Rutgers graduate students because of our membership in the CIC. The GSNB awards and endorsement, these are specifically for students who are in a Graduate School New Brunswick graduate program, and so that would be the PhD students in education. Advice is going to be our landing page for the advice and guidance that we offer to students. And so this is a really good starting point in terms of your reading and figuring out some basic answers to questions you may have about applying for funding. And then I'm going to jump over here, further reading. This is a list that is constantly under development, but here we're giving you links to some of the more relevant blog posts that we've done in recent years. And so just kind of in one spot, some useful advice that you can get to very quickly. We do have a blog, which you can get to if I go to the bottom of our webpage. You see GradFund Conversations. That will take you directly to the blog, which opens up right there. And you can see the most recent blog post is from about a week ago on how to navigate the funding landscape as a graduate student. And so we post to the blog. We try to post, at least once a week. Sometimes we succeed in that, other times we don't. But there's, usually going to be some kind of post that can be everything from some advice, such as this example, to an announcement about an upcoming event or activities, to a profile on a particular fellowship or grant that we really want students to be aware of. So going back to our website, just to continue with that tour, two other pieces of our website that I'd like to point out to you is, one, we have a page that's dedicated to discussing Fulbright opportunities that our graduate students can apply for. I know that, especially those of you who are doing either an MED or an EDD, your focus is very much on US or even New Jersey-based work. But if you do dream of having an opportunity to spend a year abroad, a Fulbright could be a nice mechanism for doing that. In particular, the Fulbright IIE, which is the Fulbright U.S. Student Grant Program, they have a number of different grant mechanisms, including an English teaching assistantship. And so this is an opportunity to apply for a Fulbright that would afford you the opportunity to spend a year overseas teaching English as a second language, or assisting a teacher who's teaching English as a second language. And so that may be something that would be of interest to someone, if they're thinking about how to bring an international component into their graduate work or postgraduate study. And going back to the knowledge base, on this initial search for awards tab, there are databases here. And so this is really your place where you can begin to research on your own fellowships and grants that are available to you. And so the first one is our database, the GradFund database. So this is the database that we've developed and that we're publishing on our website. And I can click to it to show you what the interface looks like. So you have a series of drop-down menus, so you can say, I'm a master's student pursuing a master's in education, and continue to fill in those drop-down menus, and what it will return for you will be a list of awards. And so here what you can see is that I'm currently logged in. So if you were to go to this website for the first time, you'd be prompted to log in with your university credentials. And once you've logged in with your university credentials, you'll be able to build an award list. So let's just do a quick search here, see what pops up. So we've got 13 awards. It's not a huge number, but it is a starting point. And if, let's say, for instance, it's an odd collection that we've got here, I'm not quite sure why. But if I was interested in the New Jersey State Federation of Women's Club, I could add that to my list of awards, and then I'm building an award list over here. So this would be my full list of awards, which I could then email to myself if I wanted to. Or the next time I log into the GradFund website, this list will be there for me to continue to consult and to work with. The other thing that is nice about our database is, let me give you an example here. So if I'm interested in, say, the Fulbright, if I go to the award details, you'll see once again a series of tabs that will give you some basic information about the award, that will explain to you the application process, that will summarize for you the benefits of the award, what they will provide for you, will detail the eligibility. The Knowledgebase tab, this is going to contain GradFund specific advice and guidance for you. And so I'll show you another database that the university subscribes to, which has very similar information, but this is what makes our database unique in that it has, we've gone into records where we know something about the particular competition, and we've put some of that analysis and advice directly into the records so that our students can access it. And then also another question is, so who from Rutgers has won this in the past, and we have a list of our winner history as well. And so that can kind of give you a sense of is this something that Rutgers students have applied for and been able to secure? If you look at a record and there's no list of winners, it could mean a couple of things. It could mean that people have applied and have not been successful. It could mean that people haven't applied before. It could mean that people have applied and have been successful, but we have not yet learned from them that they've been successful. And so we are constantly reaching out to students and trying to gather information and data on what their success is. So that's the GradFund database. The university subscribes to a database that is called Pivot, or also Community of Science, and I've got that screen open over here. Now this is a database, as I said, that the university subscribes to. It is a commercial database. Universities pay a subscription fee in order to be able to access it. So the benefit is that it is incredibly robust because it has a financial model to support it. And so students, you want to take advantage of that fund database, but also take advantage of Pivot because there's a lot more in there. It has a lot fancier tools that you can use in terms of setting up searches that will automatically email you results. So you want to take full advantage of that. What you want to be aware of is that the Pivot database is first and foremost intended for faculty. And so it's got a lot more information in it, and it's assuming the user is a faculty member. So what you want to do as a graduate student is to make sure that you go into advanced search, and that under applicant type, tick graduate student, and that way it will limit the results to awards that are relevant to a graduate student. And as you can see, you've got a lot of different categories that you can fill in. My advice with this database is once you've limited the results to graduate student, maybe type in the word education, but don't get any more specific than that because you'll begin to really lose results. And if you have not yet set up a Pivot account, I would encourage you to do so. As a member of the university community, you are entitled to have a Pivot account, which you would do by, excuse me, by going to sign up. Yes.
So to put that in the keyword.
Education.
Put education,
education
in
in
the keyword.
the keyword. Yeah. In order to sign up, my advice is to do it on a university-connected machine because it needs to know that you're part of Rutgers. And you'll set up a little login for yourself, and then once you have that login, you can go ahead and access the database from anywhere. So these are two different and really great tools that you can use to help you on your own begin to research different fellowships and grants that might be available to you. The other thing I want to point out to you in terms of GradFund online resources is that we have a Sakai site that's called the GradFund Virtual Office. And this is something that any Rutgers University community member can access. So if you log into Sakai and go to My Workspace, and then go to Membership, and then go to Joinable Sites, and if you go to the search box and type in GradFund, if you are not a member of the GradFund Virtual Office, it will appear. But since I am already a member of the GradFund Virtual Office, it does not appear on my list. But those are the steps you would take to subscribe yourself to the GradFund Virtual Office. If that doesn't work for you, you can also just send me an email and say, could you please add me in? And I'm happy to drop you in. I would encourage you to make sure that you are a member of the GradFund Virtual Office because there's a number of really neat things that are happening on this site. One is it is a place where we post announcements and information, and so we are sending out information through a number of different venues. This is one of them, and so it's just a good way to make sure that you're getting information. But this is also where we house our proposal writing tutorials, and so you can see over here on the side menu bar a list of a number of different tutorials that look basically like an alphabet soup. But a good starting point is our basic proposal writing tutorial, which is a generic tutorial that will walk you through step by step how to develop a funding application. And then what we have underneath that are tutorials that are for specific awards. And so if you are applying for one of those awards, that can be very helpful. But most students also find that the generic one is a really good starting point in terms of answering the question of, so how do I do this? And can kind of help walk you through it. And so what you can see here is we have a lot of resources online. We put most of them behind some kind of login because we want to have them be something that's specifically for the Rutgers University community. But it also is our effort to say that we want to make sure that our advice and guidance is as accessible as possible to the Rutgers community, recognizing that we have students who are attending classes, in all kinds of ways and at different time periods, and may not always be able to come in and meet with us one-on-one. And so there's a lot of online content material that can help you. But at the same time, we do have individual appointments that we offer throughout the year, including in the summer, and during standard business hours, so usually from 9 to 5. And these appointments can take place either in person or can take place over Skype. And so if someone's unable to come into the office, we can always set up a Skype meeting and have it be a virtual meeting instead of a face-to-face meeting. Okay. So that gives you an overview of the different GradFund resources and services that we have. Make sure I've got the right. Sorry about this. There we go. Okay. So next I want to transition to talking about integrating the process of applying for funding into your graduate career. And so to start with, I'm going to ask a question that you all probably have the answer to in some ways. Why apply for funding? And the very basic reason is because it brings resources to the graduate work that you want to do. And so that's really, really important. That's what motivates a lot of people to apply for external funding, is that they need some additional resources to come in to help support the work that they're doing. But it also does a lot of other things for you that have a value beyond, hopefully, some of that financial support that comes into you. Is that it is, by engaging and applying for funding, it is going to help you learn how to communicate your ideas effectively and clearly. And so it's just another example of how do you communicate to a diverse audience what it is that you're trying to do, why it is important, how you plan to do it, and why is it important for you to have financial support for what you want to do. It's also a way of bringing recognition to your career. And so, what's important to keep in mind here is that the focus of what we're talking about is merit-based awards, not need-based. And so the fact that you can be successful in securing a grant or a fellowship based on your academic merit is a way of bringing distinction to your career. And so when you're putting together your resume or your CV and you can point to, here are the honors and the awards that I've won, it's another way of bolstering your profile as you go on the job market. And then you're most likely going to use this skill far beyond your student days. So you're going to use this throughout your career. You're going to be interested in doing work in education, whether that is going to be work in the classroom or a school district or doing education research. And in all of these settings, you are probably going to encounter in the future the need to write grants in order to gain support for the work that you want to do, for the projects that you want to do, for the research that you want to undertake. And so if this is an experience that you can gain as a graduate student, it will serve you well in a number of different ways. So the next question is, what's out there? What can you apply for? And the focus of the kind of help that GradFund provides is to help students apply for grants and fellowships. And a lot of times people use those terms interchangeably, but they actually mean specific things. And so it's good to have a working understanding of what is a grant and what is a fellowship, so that as you begin to do research and look in the databases and begin to encounter awards, you understand what is this that's being presented to you. And so a research grant is going to typically support research-related expenses. And so if as part of your degree you are doing a research project, whether it's a dissertation or a master's thesis or just even a seminar paper that involves some original research, you can apply for a grant that would help to support the expenses related to that project. A fellowship is going to support you as a student. And so it's going to provide a stipend. It can also include a cost of education allowance to help cover tuition that will help provide you with the financial support you need while you're in coursework and pursuing your degree. And so these are important distinctions to understand as you're evaluating what your choices are. And when you start looking at awards that are available to you, you want to make sure that what you're thinking of applying for is actually going to give you money that you can use and fit your needs. So who offers this funding? Where does this money come from? And basically it's coming from two different universes, either from the government, usually the US federal government, or from private organizations. And what's important to know there is it's a good idea to have an understanding of where is this money coming from in a general sense, but also to understand that as you get into applying for funding, you're going to learn how do you put together an application. And part of what you're going to learn is that there is not a one-size-fits-all formula, and that you really need to understand the organization that is offering funding, how they're running the competition, and what they're looking for in an application. And it's good to understand kind of what is the institutional culture behind that application, to think about how do you most effectively communicate to this group what it is that you're trying to do. And then the next thing that's important to keep in mind is what motivates these organizations to offer fellowships and grants. And you can go into the database and say, show me what will support somebody pursuing a degree in education, and you will get a list of awards that will come from organizations that clearly have an interest in supporting education. And so that would be that discipline-specific kind of award. And my advice is don't stop there. Don't stop just with who's interested in funding education. That's a really good starting point. But there can be funders who are interested in supporting work that is interdisciplinary, that focuses on a specific topic or theme, a particular kind of activity, a stage of education or scholarship, or a specific population, so some, a particular background or ancestry. And so you want to approach looking for funding thinking about yourself in a holistic perspective and say, who am I as a student? Who am I in terms of my career objectives? Who am I as an individual person? And what might be the qualities that would intersect with the interest of a funder? And so taking a much broader, more holistic approach. And what that means is that there is not going to be a list of fellowships and grants that what all education students should apply for. What it means is that each individual person is going to have a slightly different list. And that's one of the things that we can help you with at GradFund, is help you to build that individualized list. So the next thing that's important to keep in mind is, what is the application cycle like? Okay, and this is, if there's nothing else that you take away from this presentation, this is probably one of the most important pieces of information to hold on to. So applying for funding takes time. It takes a long time. And what's important to know, first of all, is that most deadlines fall between September and March. And so here we are in nearly mid-February. We're getting to the tail end of the application season. Okay? And that once you submit the application, it can take 3 to 6 months for your application to be reviewed and for there to be a decision and for you to be notified of those results. And then once you've hopefully heard the good news that you've been successful, it could take another 1 to 3 months before you actually have access to the money. Okay, so this is a long-term process. So what that means is you are typically applying for funding the academic year before you're going to use it. Okay, so that's something that's really important to understand, because this is a process that really requires long-term planning, and it's motivated from a very structural issue of just how these competitions are run. So, for example, if somebody is submitting an application that is due on February 15th, they will probably learn the results of that in April, May, maybe June. And if they're successful, the money probably becomes available to them in September with the start of the academic year. Okay, so the key thing here is to be mindful of the long-term timing that this takes, and make sure that you're planning ahead. And so that's one of the reasons why my advice is to really think about how to integrate the process of applying for funding into your academic career, because it's something that you need to be thinking about, a year in advance. If I don't have funding this year and I want funding next year, now's the time that I need to be applying for the funding and working on those applications. So as you go into this, it's important to keep in mind that when you apply for funding, you're not alone. That you've got key partners, key resources here that you want to take advantage of. And one is your faculty. You want to enlist faculty support and help through this process for a number of reasons. One is that these applications will typically require letters of recommendation, usually at least one, more typically 2 or 3. And you're going to want to have your faculty write those letters. And so the best strategy here is to engage them in this process as early as possible. And so my advice is that when you decide you want to apply for funding, perhaps you've already come into GradFund and you've had a pre-application meeting and we've helped you build a list of relevant fellowships and grants that you can apply for. The next step is to set up a time to meet with your faculty advisor and share with him or her that list and discuss your plans to apply for funding, and have them give you some feedback and give you some guidance and advice about what do they think about this idea. They will probably have had some experience with some of these fellowships and grants, and can help you decide if you've got a long list, how do you narrow it down or prioritize it. If it's a short list, maybe they have some ideas that they can bring to the table. And ask them at that time if they'd be willing to work with you on the statements that you have to write, if they would be willing to look at them and give you feedback, and also ask them if they'd be willing to write letters of recommendation. And by engaging in this kind of discussion and collaborative process with them, you will have a much better chance of getting strong letters of recommendation from them versus 2 days before the deadline, dropping them an email saying, I'm applying for this grant. Here's all the material. Can't you write me a letter of recommendation? It's going to be much harder for them to write a strong letter because it's been kind of dropped in their lap at the last minute. They may or may not actually understand what's going on. But this is something that's important. So my advice is engage with your faculty early on. Have them be part of the process. You also want to take advantage of the guidance and advising that we offer in GradFund. And so, your starting point may be to schedule an individual pre-application appointment and get some assistance with identifying what you can apply for and coming up with a plan. Once you start drafting materials, my suggestion is to schedule an application review appointment and to be able to get some feedback from the fellowship advising staff. Something to know about GradFund and how we're organized. We work on a peer or near-peer mentoring model. And so the fellowship advisors are advanced doctoral candidates who have applied for the fellowship advisor position. It's a competitive position. And they've been rigorously trained in how to provide peer feedback and how to read across the disciplines in terms of giving advice and guidance on different research topics. And so it's an opportunity to work with other graduate students from outside of your field. The other thing is that all fellowship advisors, in order to be eligible to apply, have to have secured fellowships or grants as a graduate student, and so they're not that much different than you are. They understand how important it is to apply for funding. They understand how challenging it can be. They also understand how rewarding it can be when you're successful. And so they are acting as peer mentors and role models to help you through the process. Another important resource person will be program officers. These are going to be the professional staff people who are working for the organization that's offering the fellowship or the grant. And so their job is to advertise the competition, manage the competition, to manage the review process, but they're also a resource for anyone who's applying. And so, as you begin to work on an application, you will have questions, and the best thing to do is to reach out to the program officer with your questions and get the answers that you're looking for, and also see what else you can learn about the competition or the application process. So it really is worthwhile to use program officers as a resource. And then finally, your fellow graduate students. And so, as you're working on an application, you shouldn't be afraid to share it with fellow graduate students and ask them for feedback. Talk to fellow graduate students if they have experience applying for funding. See what kind of advice and guidance they could share with you. What are the lessons that they learned? What did they wish they had known before they started on this? And to use this entire community as a resource for you as you're developing an application. So some mistakes that are typically made by applicants, and so this is, lessons of what not to do. I would say the biggest mistake I see students make is they start working on the application too late. If you start working on an application a week before the deadline, it's just not going to work. So you're much better off making sure you give yourself the time that you need in order to be able to do a good job on the application. That the applicant did not go to their faculty for feedback. Another really big mistake, because the students who are successful have gotten feedback from their faculty. And so if you want to be in the competitive field, you want to make sure that you're getting faculty feedback. And then probably the biggest mistake I see is they did not follow the instructions. And this may seem, really basic, and you can say, I'm a graduate student, I'm smart, I can read, I can follow instructions. And a couple of different things can happen. Some people just don't follow the instructions, which is not a good idea. The other thing that can happen is sometimes the instructions can be pretty dense, and it's easy to miss something. And so, a lot of what we do when we have an application review appointment with a student is we are looking at the instructions or the guidelines. We're being another set of eyes just to say, hey, did you notice, they specify the margins should be 1 inch all around, and yet your margins are 3/4 of an inch. And it could be an oversight by the student. It could be a student thinking nobody's going to notice, but now we're saying somebody will notice. The important part of following the instructions is that if you don't follow the instructions, that can be a reason why your application can be returned without review. And so, it's a good idea to make sure you're following the instructions because you're doing all of this work. And something that's important to keep in mind is that when you're applying for fellowships and grants, it can be highly, highly competitive. That there's a lot of applicants out there and not a lot of resources. And so, program officers use the fact that someone does not follow the instructions as a way to screen out applicants and to just, lighten the reading load for the reviewers. And so you really want to make sure that you are following the instructions. Each year I have at least a couple of students who contact me saying they've been notified that their application is not being reviewed because they did not follow the instructions, and they want to know what they can do to fix that problem. And unfortunately, at that stage, there isn't anything that can be done. So, yes.
Can you give an example?
The margins example. So, like the funder specifies you should have 1 inch margins, and somebody's fiddled around and said nobody's going to notice it's 3/4 of an inch, and they've noticed and they've kicked the application back. Font size. Usually there will be funders who will specify the type of font you can use and size, and graduate students can be very clever in terms of manipulating, kind of how does it look, and you'll never know, and they figure it out and they kick it back for that. It can also be, they'll specify that a research statement should be 5 pages and the student submits a 10-page, and they kick it right back. So it's those kinds of things which, it can be perfectly rational to say, oh, it's not a big deal, but in the mind of the reviewer, it is a big deal.
Thank you.
Okay, so next I want to transition to talking a bit about the proposal or the application writing process. Before I do that, are there any questions on the material I've covered so far?
So you went through the Sakai stuff really quickly. With, I don't know if I assume it's probably pretty intuitive to work through, but we can email you if we don't.
Yes.
If we're not able to get through.
Exactly. It's quite intuitive to click through and follow through. Yeah. Other questions at this stage? Okay. Okay. So the proposal writing process. So when you apply for funding, it's going to take 2 different approaches. It can be applying for funding to support you as you go through coursework. And so then it's really going to take the perspective of writing a personal statement, which I'll get to in a few slides. Or it's going to be from the perspective of, I'm working on a project, and here's the funding that I need to support my project. So that's what we're going to look at first. So if we're looking at proposal writing to support a project, there's a couple of main reasons behind doing this, or purposes for doing this. And one is to gain support for your project. You want to make a compelling case for why should your project have support. It's also your opportunity to explain what your project is, which can be really useful because it may be the first time that you're actually putting down on paper, this is what I want to do and this is how I plan to do it. So what's going to come out of that is it's going to help you develop a stronger project, because you're actually going to have to think about, once I get this out of my head and get it down on the piece of paper, where are the gaps that need to be filled in? And ultimately what you want to be able to do is to convey to the funder the importance of the project. What is at stake? What is at stake for you as a researcher? What is at stake in your discipline? And so these are all the things that you want to think about as you begin to develop a proposal for a research grant. The characteristics of a strong proposal are going to be that it is clear, concise, and compelling. And so by that, first of all, it means no jargon. None of that highly specialized language that you use in your discipline that usually conveys, I really do know what's going on because I can use this language that no one else understands. Putting that into a proposal can be very dangerous on a couple of levels. One is A reviewer may begin to suspect that you actually don't know what you're talking about. You just figured out how to invoke these words to make you sound really smart. If you have a reviewer who is not from your discipline, they may say, I truly have no idea what this person is talking about, because it's not their language. And it's the danger of this is that you lose clarity and you lose conciseness, because it usually takes you a bit longer to say in jargon what you could say in very plain language. The other thing that's important is that you want something that is concretely defined with a limited scope. And so that can also be a challenge, because if you're thinking about a project and thinking about the big, broad implications, which can be very interesting and exciting, when you're writing a funding proposal, you want to make sure that you keep it focused, and that you're conveying this is a project that is highly developed and that can also be easily done, that you can accomplish the goals that you have within the time frame that you have. It is important to make sure that your proposal is accessible to a broad audience. And so one of the things that's important to keep in mind is that when you actually submit the application, the question of what happens to it. A lot of times people imagine it goes into a black hole someplace, but it doesn't. It goes through a review process. It goes through a peer review process. And so what that means is that it is typically going to be read by a panel of academics, usually anywhere from 2 to 3, maybe 5 academics, who may or may not be from your discipline, but have been invited by the funder to serve on a panel and to review and critique the applications. And they are going to go through a process of reading the applications, writing up some comments, following some kind of scoring metric that the funder provides, perhaps meeting as a committee and discussing the applications and ranking them. And so you want to keep in mind that, you know, the review audience could be broad. A good question to ask a program officer is, what is the review process like? And to find out as much as you can about the kinds of people who might be reading an application, so you understand who your audience is. But also remember that this will be handled by administrative staff, by the program officer, that a lot of people will be making decisions about your application and moving it forward in different ways based on what they're reading and how they're understanding it. So if you write your application in highly, highly technical language, and people start to misunderstand what you're talking about, it may set you up for failure rather than success. And then also something that you want to make sure that you're keeping in mind is that you're presenting a project that is a good fit with the it's important to keep in mind that you have lots of different types of organizations that will offer funding for graduate students. But they all have a motivation behind why are they offering this fellowship or grant. And so part of the preliminary research that you want to do is to understand, why is this particular fellowship or grant being offered by this specific funder? What are their goals? And to think about what your goals are and how they align. And if they do align, that's great, and you want to make sure that comes through very clearly in the proposal that you're writing. If they don't align, then you want to think very carefully about whether or not it's worth your time to apply. Because while you may not be a perfect fit, there will be a number of applicants who are the perfect fit. And the competition is really going to be around those applicants. And so, you know, a lot of applying for funding is upfront, doing the research that you need to do to figure out where's the right fit and where do I have the best chance of being successful. So this next slide gives you an overview of what is a typical proposal structure, with the main categories that you see here: introduction, research question, background and significance, research plan, preliminary work, project timeframe. And the percentages are to give you some guidance about how much of the document should be dedicated to each of those. When you go into our Sakai site and our proposal writing tutorial, you'll see an expanded version of this, and we'll walk you through in a lot of detail, you know, kind of understanding how to think about each of these sections. It'll give you writing prompts on how to begin to develop a narrative, questions to think about, those sorts of things. On the next slide, next couple of slides, I do a shortened version of what we have in the tutorial on the Sakai site, giving a little more detail about what are the kinds of things that you want to make sure that you're discussing in each of those sections. So as we go through here, you can just can see, that there's going to be different things that you want to think about that to make sure that you're talking about, and that there's a particular sequence that follows the conventions of proposal writing. Now, as we look at this, what's important to keep in mind is that this is a general guidance, and it can be a really good starting point. But whenever you're applying for funding, you want to look at the guidelines, and you want to see if they are providing you in their guidelines with a specific structure that they want the applicant to follow. And if that's the case, you want to ensure that you're following that guidance very clearly. And if you're given that kind of guidance, what that usually will mean is that the reviewers will have a review sheet that will follow exactly the outline they're giving you. And so you want to make things easy on the reviewer, easy for them to find the points that they need to evaluate on by structuring your narrative to follow that outline. But if you don't have that kind of guidance, this outline will serve you well in terms of a generic proposal. So what else goes into an application? Another big piece, and this is especially if you are applying for funding to support your course of study, would be a personal statement. And so that would be a narrative that you write that describes, why are you applying for funding? What is your motivation for study? And so what we have up here on this slide are key questions that you want to make sure that you're answering in a personal statement. And so what I like to encourage students to keep in mind is that, I read a lot of personal statements that start out with these very flowery introductions of how did a person first fall in love with whatever their course of study is. So in this case, when did you begin to dream of becoming, a high school biology teacher? So we'll pick on our friend who has had to go to class. And, to have a story of when, how a high school biology teacher of your own inspired you to go into the profession can be a very compelling story. But ultimately what we hear more about at that point is the high school teacher who inspired you, rather than hearing about you and your motivations. And so a technique that I encourage students to think about is, in a personal statement, to front load what are your career goals, and to very clearly articulate what it is that you aspire to do, and where are you in that process of doing that, and how can this financial support help you achieve those goals. And so very upfront linking those, making it very clear that there's a compelling case here and one that makes sense. And then, linking it to why do I need this funder in particular to support me? And then also, highlighting why are you the best person to be supported? Why are you the best candidate for this particular fellowship? Why are you best suited for the career goals that you have articulated? And part of what you want to do is explain the intellectual trajectory of your career. And so where are you in your academic training? What have you done? What are you doing? What do you aspire to do? How does that connect back to your goals? And how is funding important to help you achieve those goals? And then, ultimately the question of, since you are currently enrolled in graduate school, why is Rutgers the best place for you to be able to do this? So for them to see that you've thought very carefully and intentionally about how you've wound up here and why this will make sense. So other things that can go into an application will be a budget. That you're asking for money, so a lot of times they'll want to see, well, if you got this money, how do you plan to spend it? And the key thing there is to be accurate, to not inflate numbers, because everyone will see that you're inflating numbers, and that does not inspire confidence that you actually know what you're doing. You should be realistic about what do you need. A $10,000 fellowship that you could spend on anything. This is not the time to propose I'm going to go and buy a lot of expensive computing equipment, unless you can demonstrate you actually need that equipment for something in order to advance in your degree. The other thing that's important to keep in mind is to know what the funder will and will not pay for. Frequently in the guidelines they will specify we can cover the following types of expenses. but we cannot pay for these other things. If you ask for things that they've said they cannot support, you run the risk of not being selected, or if you're selected, you run the risk of having only a partial award made to you because they're going to cut out whatever they can't support and say, okay, well, you know, if we say we won't support equipment and half your budget is for equipment, we're going to cut that out and just give you the half that you could actually use. So, you know, when a funder says they can't support something, it's not an arbitrary claim. There's a reason behind it, and it's usually going to be a reason, you know, that is based on how they're governed. That, you know, somehow in their bylaws it says they can pay for X, but they can't pay for Y. So if they say they can't pay for Y, don't ask for Y. What else goes into an application? Letters of recommendation. So we talked a bit about this earlier on. You know, plan early who's going to write letters of recommendation for you. Talk to them ahead of time. Make sure the letter writers also understand the submission requirements for the letters, because increasingly applications are submitted online through web portals. So what that means is that you're going into the application portal, you're entering the name of your letter writers and their email address, and then an email link is being sent, and an HTML link is being sent to the letter writer saying, you know, student X has identified you as a letter writer, please click here to upload your letter. So you've got a couple of technological hurdles there. I would say probably about 50% of the time those emails wind up in somebody's spam folder and they never see them. So you want to make sure that when you enter this information and it generates the email, you tell your letter writers right away, I've done this, because these emails are sent out pretty quickly. And so if the email goes missing, then there's a better chance of catching it in the spam folder. Because sometimes it can be a bit tricky if the whole thing has to be reset. Just it's time consuming to work with tech support. The other thing is then make sure your advisor understands, you know, that they're going to have to upload the letter. That may work smoothly. There may be technical problems. So you want to make sure your letter writers can have, you know where to go for technical support, because that technical support is usually going to come from the funder, that you have to call their help desk and get help with these things. So this is another reason why it's good to be in touch with your letter writers early and not wait to the last minute, because if there's any technical glitches, it may take time to sort them out. So what to do now? My advice is start with learning about what you can apply for by scheduling a pre-application meeting. And once again, you can do that on our website by clicking on the Schedule a Meeting tab. We are in the midst of the deadline season, and there's still deadlines for a lot of small grants in March. And so as we're getting into February, March, you know, it's getting later in the season, but there still will be things that you can apply for. Work with your faculty mentors and GradFund to develop the strongest application possible, and be sure to take advantage of all the resources and programs that we offer throughout the year to help you with developing your applications. So that brings to a close the presentation. Are there any questions?